why are you the go-to guy on innovation? What makes you such an innovative guy?
Well, I think there's a few reasons. One is that I tend to like to play in what I'll call the white space. So what's interesting is I've noticed over the past couple of years that everyone's moving into the innovation space, which actually tells me it's time to move out of the innovation space. I don't like to play where everyone else is playing. And also, as you could tell from the title of my books, I'm a bit of a contrarian. The whole concept of best practices, every company uses them. So I always ask myself the question, is that really right? And I find that in many cases they aren't. But I think the main reason is because I like to focus on things that are not in my area of expertise. So I do not read other innovation books. I know there's a lot of them out there. I don't read them. I actually read books on psychology, on magic, on neuroscience, on sports performance, because I find those things actually will give me greater insights into the way people can think differently and innovate.
Well, talk to us about the definition of innovation. Describe innovation in your terms.
Well, a lot of people get caught up with innovation and they start thinking about the product, the process, the business model. And in fact, to me, the key thing here is about adaptability. So to me, innovation is really about how do we improve our clock speed? How do we go faster? And essentially, how do we stay one step ahead of the competition so that as they're nipping at our heels, we're able to keep away from them?
So we often hear the term think outside of the box as the advice in how to be more innovative. And you actually say that this is bad advice. Explain that to us.
I have a cartoon that I like to use during my presentations, and it's a cat in a litter box. And the litter box says, I don't care what anyone else says, I do my best thinking inside the box. And to me, this is really the key thing. We don't want you to think outside the box. What you need to do is find a better box. There's an exercise I do with a brick, very simple exercise. What I will do is get people to pair up, and they need to come up with as many uses of a brick as they can. Most people's uses of a brick are around construction, beating people over the head, weighing things down. Because what we do as human beings when we solve problems is we naturally look at what we know about the problem and we try to find solutions around it. So the second half of the exercise, I have people connect a brick to something random. So instead of just looking at a brick, we connect it to how do we use a brick in a marriage? How do we use a brick in the bathroom? How do we use a brick on the body? And then we get things, if it's on the body, we use it to improve our posture, to pump up our biceps, to exfoliate dead skin. I've done this experiment now with about 500,000 people, and what we find is consistently that second method, where we've actually constrained you more, develops higher quality and higher quantity of creative ideas. So constraints in innovation are actually a really good thing because it increases the relevancy because you create the context under which it operates, and you also create a higher level of innovation and new breakthrough ideas. So the issue isn't so much that we need to think outside the box. The problem is most people are just in the wrong box to begin with.
So just to expand on the baseline of this conversation, then I want to jump into some case study examples of, or at least have you point out some companies that are doing it right and some companies that might be doing it wrong. So first off, you believe that traditional models of innovation are broken, inefficient, and then don't produce results. So explain why you feel this way and what's actually wrong with conventional approaches.
There are a few issues with the way most companies operate. I think the single biggest issue is that companies have become enamored with asking their employees for ideas. And what this does is it creates an incredible level of inefficiency because people start asking all different types of questions. They start giving all different suggestions about how they might apply a solution that they have. We don't need more ideas. So the better way to do it is to really think about what is the issue, problem, challenge, or opportunity that if we could find a solution to this would create the greatest level of impact and leverage for the organization. And by doing that, we're able to accelerate the way we innovate and we're able to do it much more efficiently.
So let's start talking about application here. Give us a few approaches that people could start applying today to bring more creativity into their work life and their business.
Well, I think the most important thing in becoming more creative is actually to start off with asking better questions. If you can start with what matters most and then frame the question in a way that will help you improve the likelihood of finding solutions, that is the number one place to start.
So talk to us about that. Do you have a framework that is a suggested standard that people can go about enhancing their question making so that they are asking better questions? Do you have some sort of a framework for that?
Sure. The easiest way to think about this is using Goldilocks and the Three Bears as the analogy. I mean, if you know the story with Goldilocks and the Three Bears, basically Goldilocks goes into the house. There's three beds. There's one bed that's too hard, one bed that's too soft, and the other one that's just right. When we start to frame questions, we want to make sure we're framing the question in a way that is just right. So a lot of times our natural inclination is to ask something that's really broad, abstract, and fluffy. So how do we increase revenue, or how do we get more customers? And the problem is it is so broad that the number of possible solutions is infinite, and the odds are that you won't be able to find the needle in the stack of other needles. As an example of this, there was some work done in the UK around education. Now, if you think for a moment about education and how you want to improve the educational experience for a student, there's a million and one things that are involved, and they've tried to work on all of them, whether it's teachers pay, the curriculum, technology, busing, infrastructure. We could go on forever. But if we look at the research, there's one thing more than anything else that has a single greatest impact on a child's learning, and that is actually parental involvement. So when you change the question from how do we improve the educational system, which has zero chance of being solved, to how do we increase parental involvement, we're able to find solutions. And in fact, in this particular case, there is a school in Bogota, Colombia, that has 100% parental involvement, and that starts as a seed for being able to roll out to larger school systems. So if we're too broad, too abstract, too fluffy, we're going to have a very difficult time. On the flip side, a lot of times, though, and human nature is also to word our opinions on what the solutions should be as the question. So how do we use 360-degree feedback, or how do we use some different type of technique, or how do we do something? And we're implying the solution. And in implying the solution, we reduce the likelihood of finding breakthroughs in different spaces. So if we ask these questions using that Goldilocks principle, not too abstract, but not too specific and detailed, you will increase the likelihood of finding the breakthrough solutions.
Great point. So now I know that you have a three-step formula for innovation success. So take us through that formula.
Formula is very simple, and I think this is probably the key to success in any organization of any size. It is basically ask the right question, the right way, of the right people. And what I mean by that, and we've talked about some of this, but if you're asking the right question, it means that it's important, it's strategic, it's something that's going to make an impact in the world, it's going to be able to fulfill on whatever your strategic intent is as an organization. And that's sort of obvious, but then we have to ask it the right way, and that's the Goldilocks principle. Make sure we ask the question at a level of detail. So let me give you an example. I love this one. It comes from Apple in the really, really, really early days before they existed. When Steve Jobs went to the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center, he saw the sort of the prototypes and the working models of the earliest GUI mouse-based computer. So he thought this was really cool. And the spec that he gave the designers when he left there wasn't to replicate that. But one of the things he knew was the mouse was going to be key. And so he said that what we need to do is the Xerox mouse cost $300 to build, and it will break within 2 weeks. We need to build a mouse that can be built for less than $15, and it won't break for a couple of years. And by the way, I want to be able to use it on Formica or on my blue jeans or anything else. So that's asking the right question the right way. Getting that level of specificity, but not being overly specific, because he didn't say how to do it. And then if you ask it of the right people, then that tells us it's not always the experts in a particular area that we want to go to. By the way, the first version of the mouse that Apple developed used the ball inside of underarm deodorant and a bunch of butter dishes. That was their first mock-up of how a mouse could actually be developed.
Now, we all know that innovation just can't be about what we do ourselves. We have to create a culture of innovation in our business in order to succeed. So give us a couple of ways that we can start creating this culture of innovation in our business.
There are a few different ways. I'll be a broken record and just say that the first thing is to focus on the challenges, because if you're focused on what matters most, that is the key. But I'll give you two other things that I find to be really useful, certainly depending on the size of your organization. When I look at innovation, to me, innovation is at three distinct levels. So there's innovation as an event, which means that people decide to innovate whenever they decide to innovate. It's very ad hoc. At the second level, innovation becomes a process and a capability. What that means is we now have some level of predictability and repeatability in what we do. There's measures, there's processes, there's people skilled in innovation. We have all the infrastructure and technology necessary to make it happen. So we will treat innovation the way we treat finance. Finance works because we have a chief financial officer, because we have CPAs, because we have software, ERP software. We need similar types of things for innovation, recognizing that innovation is not done by a team of people, but rather it is done by everyone inside of an organization. Which then leads us to the last level, level 3, which is innovation as a system. This basically means that the processes and the capabilities become less important because it now becomes very, very natural. And if we look at that third level, there's an example I love from a company that I think is really fascinating. They're controversial for a number of reasons, but they're really fascinating, called Koch Industries, K-O-C-H, out of Wichita, Kansas. They are about $100 billion in annual sales. One of the stories they told me, which I really love, is because they're in such a dangerous business, one of the things that Charles Koch, the CEO, wanted to focus on one year was to reduce the level of accidents inside the organization. So if you think about how most companies would try to improve the level of safety, they would probably hire more safety inspectors, or they would put people through safety awareness training. In fact, what they did was something completely different. They completely ignored the safety department, and it became the responsibility of each and every person. They gave bonuses to people for finding safety problems or finding solutions to safety problems. It was a challenge that was important. People could rally around it. They didn't need a centralized team to deal with it. It became the responsibility of everyone. And what they found was in 1 year, the number of accidents dropped by 50% and another 50% in the next year, and they had the highest level of safety in the world. So to me, what that says is we want to push decision-making down to the lowest levels of the organization, give people that autonomy, or in other words, I always say that the top-down philosophy should be left to convertibles.
Okay, that's great advice. So let's talk about the culture of society. I think we're actually cultivating ADD with a lot of the devices and the way that our society is information overloaded. I mean, the large majority of people in business today are incredibly busy, overwhelmed, and overstressed. So share with us how this impacts creativity and the performance that we've been talking about here.
Darren, that is a fantastic point, and it's something which I really try to emphasize to organizations is there is this ADD thing, and then there's this overwhelm of work that people have. There's an exercise I do, which I won't get into the details of it, but what it shows is that people are pre-programmed, pre-wired to go for their predetermined answers. We already know the answer to everything, and when we're under stress, we have zero capacity to develop any new ideas. And if we look in the brain, this is clearly understood. In order to access the creative parts of the brain, we actually need to close off certain parts. And we know this. I mean, we all know this. I mean, we get our best ideas, our most creative ideas when we're in the shower, when we're napping, when we're meditating. And so this is really important. So what we need to recognize is that inside of organizations, this stress level will adversely impact the level of performance of your employees. And there's a great example. I worked with a Formula One team a number of years ago. And the thing that always interested me most about Formula One were the pit crews. And for those who are not familiar with Formula One, they're race cars, and they're really, really fast. And the pit crews, back when I worked with them, were 20 people around a car, changing tires, fueling the car, changing the aerodynamics, doing minor maintenance in a matter of seconds. And the way they get a pit crew to go fast is they basically put them under a lot of stress. They time them. And they will do this over and over and over. And there's a point that no matter what they do, no matter how hard they try, the pit crew cannot go 1/1000th of a second faster. This is their best possible time. As an experiment, the pit crew boss tried something different. What he decided to do was, instead of telling people they were going to be measured on time, which was creating stress, he would measure them on their style. So as they were changing the tires, they were to think the word smooth. As they were fueling the car, they were to think smooth. What they found was when they weren't focused on going fast, but rather being present to what they needed to do and reducing the stress by being present, they were able to shave off 0.2 to 0.3 of a second off of their best possible time. And this, in a pit crew, is just an extraordinary amount of time. And here's the really cool part is, if you ask the pit crew, Were they going faster or slower when they were focused on style? Everyone thought they were going slower. So there's this paradox of performance that relates not just to physical things, but even more so with creative things. The more we put people under stress, the more we get people focused on extrinsic measures and extrinsic rewards. People focus on getting the job done rather than focusing on the quality and the fact that creativity is a process.
Excellent. Well, let's talk about when to innovate, because we know we just can't innovate for the sake of innovation. We have to have a reason, a motive, because not all innovations are created equal, of course. So share how we know when the right time to innovate is and what we should focus on innovating in the right places.
It's a great point. I mean, George Orwell said in Animal Farm, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. And the same thing was true with innovation. I am not advocating that everybody innovate around everything. What we need to do is, again, innovate on the challenges. So the first thing is to figure out what matters. Coming back to the question, what problem should we be working on if we ask the right question the right way? And in order to do that, we need to start looking at, first of all, what matters most in the eyes of the market, the customers, your current customers, your lost customers, future customers, doesn't really matter. And also understand, what are their unarticulated needs? We can't just ask them. To me, when we start doing surveys and focus groups, we actually get the worst and most unproductive information we could probably get, because it leads us in the wrong way, because we've led the witness with these questions. So we need to use other techniques, whether it's ethnographic studies where we go in and we observe people, or we do particular types of analysis where we can understand subconscious and unconscious beliefs. That really helps. So if we are working on the right things, then we also want to make sure we're working on something that leverages our core strengths, has a high likelihood of being implemented. And then the last and probably the most important thing is we want to innovate where we differentiate. We don't want to innovate on something that is sort of core to our business, or even something that is just support. Look, let's follow best practices in that situation. They're extremely useful. But where we differentiate ourselves from the competition, this is the place where we should be focusing our innovation efforts, because this is the chance to really step ahead of the competition.
Now, I want to bring this up, Steve. You did a TEDx talk at NASA, and you said something in it that I want you to touch on for our listeners. You said, and I'm paraphrasing here, sometimes it's our expertise that's getting in the way of our full creative potential. So explain what you mean by this and how we can prevent our expertise from hindering our creativity.
So I do believe that expertise is the enemy of innovation. And I sort of use a tongue-in-cheek example. I mean, I'm a naturally messy person, and I have the bad habit of losing my keys pretty much on a daily basis. You'd think I'd learned by now, but I don't. And if you think about most people, when they're looking for something, they spend 15 minutes, they look for it, and there's something we inevitably say to ourselves once we find it. Can you believe it? They were in the last place I looked. Well, of course, who finds something and keeps on looking for it? The same thing is true of the brain. If you are an expert, you are going to find answers quickly, and the odds are once you find it, you will stop looking. So what we need to get is that as human beings, we have very strong, naturally pre-programmed responses to everything, and we also have confirmation bias. And I think this is really fascinating. Confirmation bias basically says that we will only find evidence to support what we believe. Even if there's contrary evidence out there, we will typically ignore it. And so one of the steps of breaking this is to recognize that we need to suspend our judgment. We need to prevent our desire to jump to the solution quickly. We need to play around with different possible combinations of ideas and solutions. So in innovation, what we want to do is treat our innovations as experiments. And we want to either confirm or refute our hypotheses of these experiments. And therefore, as we're gathering data and going through the innovation process, we want to have a rapid cycle of starting with small experiments that we can scale. And by doing this, we actually can bust through our expertise mentality and start getting closer to things that might actually be real in the marketplace.
So then the last question for you today, Steve. Innovation thinking is usually synonymous with the title of entrepreneur. So we'd love to get your best advice for all the entrepreneurs out there listening to help them take their innovative thinking to the next level and channel it into driving a more successful business.
I think the first thing is to recognize nobody really cares about your product. And if you get too wed to the product, you're going to lose. The real question is, what does the product do for people? And a lot of people who are entrepreneurs sort of miss that boat when it comes to thinking about the impact on the marketplace. But also a lot of entrepreneurs, they like to surround themselves with people who think like them. And if we think back to the other conversation we had, they need to start partnering with people who are different than they are. I think the next thing is then to find the leverage points. And I'm a big believer in leverage. To me, that is like the key to any business, is who has the market you want to get into. Instead of trying to just figure out what your product is and then bringing it to market, actually find the people that might already have the market you want. Partner with them, certainly in the early stages, because you then get instant distribution and instant channels. My last two pieces. One is to hide the complexity from the customer. We love, when we're developing things, all the nuances and the intricacies of it, but the customers don't really want that. They want simplicity. The best innovation is the simplest innovation. It's not when you can add more features to a product. It's actually when you remove as many features as possible and still have it do exactly what you want. So hide the complexity, not just of the product, but hide the complexity of your business.